Imagine growing up without ever knowing who your father was. For Ava, Claire, and Lily, life had always been simple, until the day they attended their mother's funeral and locked eyes with a stranger who couldn't stop staring back. A powerful man. A broken man. What they didn't know was that this stranger held a secret that would change everything they thought they knew about their past and their future. Stay with us as we unravel a story of second chances, unspoken truths, and a bond that defied time itself. And please share with us where you're listening to from. On a bitter winter day, Nathan Callahan buried his wife Vivian, the only person who ever truly knew the man behind the ruthless Wall Street legend. The grief weighed heavily on his chest, pressing down with a suffocating force. As he stood silently at Oak Ridge Memorial Park, surrounded by mourners dressed in black, his mind drifted between haunting memories and the emptiness of the present. Among the crowd of friends, colleagues, and well-wishers, something peculiar disrupted his fog of sorrow. 3 identical little girls, no more than 8 years old, stood quietly near a towering oak tree. Their presence was eerie yet captivating. Dressed simply and almost blending into the winter landscape, they watched him with expressions far too solemn and knowing for their age. Their eyes locked onto Nathan's, holding his gaze with silent intensity. For a fleeting moment, time seemed to stand still. Before he could gather the strength to approach them or even speak, the girls turned and vanished behind the tree, leaving only questions in their wake. That night, as Nathan sat alone in his grand but cold penthouse, their faces refused to leave his mind. Their synchronized movements, their hauntingly familiar eyes, and their sudden disappearance gnawed at his thoughts. He tried to dismiss it as exhaustion or grief playing tricks, but deep inside, he knew this encounter was anything but ordinary. Haunted, Nathan asked his loyal driver Harry Green to investigate. Harry's discovery shook Nathan to the core, sending tremors through everything he thought he knew about his past. The girls, Ava, Claire, and Lily Bennett, were not only Julia Bennett's daughters, but the likely result of a chapter in his life he thought had long closed. Julia, the brilliant and fiercely independent woman he once loved deeply, had passed away only a few months ago, leaving her 3 daughters behind. Nathan's mind raced as he connected the dots. The girls had been born 8 years earlier, perfectly aligning with the passionate but fleeting relationship he and Julia had shared before his career ambitions had torn them apart. Julia had never told him about her pregnancy, never reached out, and had seemingly chosen to raise the children on her own. The realization was devastating. Nathan grappled with conflicting emotions, shock, guilt, and an overwhelming sense of loss for the years he had missed. His heart sank deeper as he imagined Julia facing motherhood alone, while he remained oblivious, pursuing fortune and power. Nathan remembered Julia, the brilliant, independent professor. Their love ended abruptly when Nathan made the difficult decision to leave for London, chasing the success and ambitions that he believed defined his future. He had convinced himself that long-distance love couldn't survive the harsh demands of his career, and in doing so left behind not just Julia, but unknowingly, an entire part of his destiny. Years passed with no contact, his memories of Julia fading into the background of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals. But now, standing in the shadow of the revelation, he faced a devastating and life-altering truth. He had daughters. Daughters who had grown up never knowing he existed, who had lived without his presence, without his guidance, without his love. The weight of that realization crushed him. Nathan understood that what he lost wasn't just years. It was milestones, laughter, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. The void left in their lives, and his, was immeasurable. He vowed to meet them without revealing who he really was. Yet, with Aunt Rebecca's help, Nathan met the girls. Ava, the leader, was guarded, her arms crossed and eyes narrowed as if assessing whether Nathan posed a threat to their fragile world. Claire, ever the curious and sharp observer, studied him carefully, her gaze flicking from his face to his gestures as though trying to solve a complicated puzzle. Lily, on the other hand, radiated a gentleness and openness that softened the tension in the air. Her small, hesitant smile showed a flicker of warmth despite the uncertainty. Their questions, however, were anything but childlike in simplicity. "Did you know our mom?" they asked together, their voices filled with quiet demand, not just curiosity. He answered truthfully, admitting that he had known Julia long ago, but carefully kept the deeper truth hidden. Still, as they listened, there was a shift. A subtle but undeniable connection forming. Something unspoken lingered between them, woven from shared loss, quiet longing, and the invisible thread of blood that none of them yet dared to name. Nathan became a steady presence. Ballet recitals, bookstore trips, and Sunday ice cream slowly melted the girls' reservations. Hannah held his hand. Claire debated science facts. Even Ava, slowest to trust, began to soften. Nathan was no longer a stranger. He had become more than an occasional visitor in their world. He had become a source of comfort, of reliability, someone who felt like family, even if they didn't yet know the full truth. For their 9th birthday, Nathan wanted to give them something deeply meaningful, something that would tie their present to the memory of their mother. After much thought, he designed custom lockets, each one slightly different and uniquely crafted to represent each of the girls individually. Inside each locket, he inscribed special messages that echoed the words Julia once used to describe them: strength for Ava, wisdom for Claire, and heart for Lily. When the girls opened the delicate boxes, their eyes lit up with surprise and emotion. For a long moment, none of them spoke. They quietly traced the engraved words with their small fingers, as if feeling the connection to their mother and to each other. Lily's eyes glistened with tears as she immediately placed the locket around her neck, while Claire carefully adjusted hers, reading the inscription again and again. Ava, usually the most reserved, softly whispered, "Thank you," her voice barely audible but carrying immense weight. The triplets were deeply touched by the gesture. The lockets became more than just jewelry. They became symbols of love and remembrance. Slowly, through small, tender moments like this, Nathan became part of their inner circle, no longer an outsider, but someone who belonged. Nathan planned for the future, designing a new apartment with rooms for the girls. They cautiously agreed, but gave him ground rules: no replacing their mom, no buying love, and always being honest. Nathan accepted, ready to earn their trust. Ice skating became their tradition. Homework sessions and sleepovers followed. Nathan grew closer to each girl, embracing their individual quirks. Still, the secret loomed heavily over every moment Nathan spent with the girls. The growing bond between them, filled with laughter, shared stories, and tender moments, was shadowed by the one truth he kept hidden deep inside. Charlotte, ever perceptive and protective, watched carefully as the relationship deepened. One evening, as they cleaned up after a movie night filled with popcorn and giggles, she pulled Nathan aside, her voice low and serious. "You know this can't go on forever," she warned him quietly, her eyes filled with both kindness and concern. "Sooner or later, they're going to demand answers. They're smart girls, Nathan. They're already starting to wonder." Nathan nodded solemnly, knowing she was right. A year later, on a chilly, overcast afternoon, the girls stood solemnly at Julia's grave with Nathan, the wind gently rustling the trees around them. The moment was heavy with emotion, as each of them carried thoughts that had weighed on their hearts for months. Ava, the eldest and most composed, broke the silence first. Her voice, though soft, was unwavering as she turned to Nathan and simply said, "We know." The words hung in the air, reverberating through Nathan like a shockwave. The triplets had discovered the letters Julia had never sent, the letters where she had confessed the truth of their parentage. They now knew, beyond any doubt, that Nathan was their father. Nathan's breath caught as he waited for their reaction. But instead of anger or confusion, he saw something else in their eyes, a tender understanding, and something that looked remarkably like forgiveness. They had processed the revelation together, as they always did, leaning on one another's strength. Ava stepped closer, her gaze steady. "Mom would be happy you're here now." "Dad," she finished softly, the word carrying both the weight of acceptance and the promise of a new beginning. Nathan felt tears sting his eyes as a surge of love and gratitude washed over him. At that moment, they were no longer separated by secrets or time. They were simply a father and his daughters, finally united. Nathan's luxurious penthouse transformed into a true home. The girls' laughter filled the once silent and cavernous halls, breathing life into every empty corner that had long stood in cold stillness. Their footsteps echoed with playful energy as they danced, played games, and filled the air with chatter about school, dreams, and inside jokes only they could understand. Saturdays became their sacred ritual, mornings spent making pancakes in pajamas, afternoons exploring parks or museums, and evenings gathered around the living room, watching movies or simply enjoying each other's company. Each moment felt precious and irreplaceable. For Nathan, who had once spent years surrounded by silence and sterile luxury, these moments were transformative. He no longer looked at his home as a monument to his success, but as a warm space filled with the vibrant chaos of family life. Where emptiness once reigned, there now existed endless love and laughter. Nathan, who had believed redemption was beyond his reach, now found himself healed by the joy of the daughters he had never known he needed so deeply. Ava, Claire, and Lily were no longer strangers, no longer distant mysteries from a painful past. They were his daughters. They were his light, his joy, and the greatest gift life had unexpectedly granted him. Through them, Nathan discovered his true wealth, a second chance at love, belonging, and fatherhood. What do you think of today's story of fate and reunion? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you so much for tuning in to Storyline Narratives.